I'm Rohan. I work at this company called Highline Beta. We're a corporate innovation and venture capital firm. I do a lot of cool stuff there, and most of it is around thinking about what it looks like for us to go push the envelope on what the future of technology looks like. So that's the venture capital part, and then I get to build a lot of that sort of stuff. And so today I'm going to kind of ruminate on some theoretical things. And you know how Leah just made the joke about getting me drunk and hearing about stuff? Well, the last time we were out, she's like, listen, I want you to come up on stage and just rant. Rant for 8 minutes. So I'm going to do that. So I want to talk about the future of identity. And for me, the future of identity is really, really interesting and important. But the big thing is I get to go rant about this company called Equifax for a little bit. So all of you get to be part of my rant. Thank you, Vish. So the first question I have for everybody here in terms of identity, who are you? Like, what comes to mind in terms of defining who you are? And I feel like for a lot of people, it is like you're thinking about who you define yourself to be, etc. But like, I'm talking about identity. And so when I asked a few of my friends this and I pushed them, they were like, well, yeah, like I'm a Canadian citizen, I have a license. Some of my friends don't have licenses, so that's on my to-do list to help them. But the big thing is like, there's a few different identity pieces at a national level, at an international level that we can think of. The passport lets us get into other cities. The driver's license lets us get into bars. The SIN number lets the CRA keep track of what's happening. Well, that's a really interesting thing, but it's not exactly what identity means from a corporate perspective, from a daily life perspective. And like, to me, what it really means is like the know your customer aspect of a lot of fintech, a lot of creditworthiness, and a lot of other interesting things, including rental scores. Like, who here's had your credit score checked to go get a rental apartment? And like, who here thinks that makes any sense? Okay, a couple of people. That's cool. Well, we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. But to me, like that, the entire KYC credit layer, who this person is, well, there's a lot of different inputs to it. Hence my 2 arrows there. There's a lot of different inputs to it, and then there's also a lot of different outputs to it. And the outputs are, well, I am a fintech company, and I want to understand who you are. Come through my KYC process. And at the end of the day, it's probably one of these 3 firms. In Canada, it's probably one of the top 2. So let's talk about my favorite company of all, Equifax. Equifax was created 1899, and the entire premise of Equifax, which at that point in time was called retail credit, was let's amass a lot of data about people to figure out whether or not they'd be a good person to write a check to. Whether that check is for their house or a business, whatever. Ostensibly a great idea. 1920, tons of Equifax offices in different places, lots of files being put together. And then after that, after 1920, we had this period, Great Depression, World War II. And coming out of World War II, all of a sudden, there's a lot of different liberalization happening in the macroeconomy of North America, or Canada and US, let's call it like that for right now. And so by around the 1960s, Equifax had built out this massive amount of information about people. We'll talk about that information a little bit, but like they had a couple different situations happening to them. There was a few different lawsuits. This one, whether it be retail credit, I'm going to specifically talk about in a second. But then in 1970, the US Congress figured out, wait, there's this entity with so much data about the different citizens and non-citizens who live in this country and the one upstairs. And well, we're the one upstairs. There's a lot of bad press that happened at Equifax during this time. We'll talk about it in a little bit more detail in a second, but 1975 is when they became Equifax for real. One of the biggest reasons that they did that was they were just taking so much heat from everybody. And for me, like doing the research on this talk was me also looking back into like the cycles of history and realizing that, holy shit, they're doing the exact same things now. And so like September 2017, 146 million Americans had their data breached. And does anybody here know how that data breach occurred? Well, they just didn't patch a system. It was a vulnerability that was really well known. It was just bad security in general. Most software developers would have caught it right away, but you know what? Negligence happened. And then July 2019, $700 million fine. My math is pretty okay. That's a pretty ridiculous ratio of what the cost was per person for Equifax. And given that a lot of their credit reports are above $20, nah, let's keep going on with that. So, how did we get to this point? The starting point of everything is, well, social security numbers, social insurance numbers, and all that. This is like a hot take I found on Twitter that I thought was pretty hilarious. But it was really about, why do we have these ridiculous numbers and these ridiculous things that humans can't actually use? Why do we use those as like our identity? This is why Americans get their identity stolen. Well, I don't have that slide up. Why Americans get their identity stolen all the time, because they have to memorize these numbers, not give them away, but then give them away. There we go. So like the first real thing for me, doing a ton of research and like being a little bit salty about this entire situation, well, it's about the inequity in the system. And the thing you have to remember is these systems were built at the tail end of the 19th century, and after that they were renewed in the 50s after World War II. But what else was happening around then? Civil rights movements, a lot of more discourse about feminism, a lot of different immigration policies happening. And the thing is, these systems started rising basically because they were taking on a whole lot of data from a variety of sources, well, that perpetuated the status quo. Alan Weston is probably the father of privacy law in North America. He's written a couple of really interesting books. He's a law professor. Highly encourage you to go read a lot of things that he's written if privacy and this entire material really, really appeals to you. But like the really shocking part to me when I was reading some of the stuff that he'd written, this quote specific comes out of a New York Times op-ed. Equifax wasn't sitting there taking the same amount of data that we think they're taking right now. They were literally going around and sending in investigators around to figure out whether or not somebody was reputable. And well, in 1950s, 60s, 70s, America and Canada, reputable was a little bit of a subjective thing based on who you were. And so this is the foundations of this company. And these are the same cyclical problems that have occurred over history. And this has happened many different times. But I'm not going to go dwell on what happened in the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s. Because the next part is like misalignment of incentives. And so I have a hypothetical story here, but let's start with a little bit of context. When the US Congress did a report on creditworthiness in, I believe it was 2011, going off my memory here, they found that 23% of Americans had potentially material errors in their credit report. I've put a little citation there because this is an actual report to Congress. And then there's a second report to Congress where it's about 80 million complaints are made annually. Now, one is the volume, one is just the materiality of this. But the thing is, the volume aspect is a very, very important problem to understand, because when you go do a dispute, it doesn't actually get handled in any crazy investigation. Actually, what happens is legislation has created this lovely little regulatory bubble. And so in this case, I put up a little hypothetical situation here. Well, there's this person, and this person looks at his credit report, and this person sees a hit on his credit report, his only delinquency. That delinquency is from Amex. And the weird part is, this person is going, wait, I closed my Amex account. Why do I have this ding? Because I have a credit report from 6 months ago from before I closed my Amex account, and I don't have this ding on my system. So this person calls Amex, and Amex goes right away. Within 5 minutes, they go, oh shit, sorry, that shouldn't have been on there. That was actually an annual fee on your card after you canceled your card. And so at that point in time, this person goes, great, that kind of sucks. What are you going to do about it? They go, oh, we'll reverse the charges. And then that person goes, well, damn, I talked way too quick. That person went, okay, so how do I reverse this? And basically that person, being me, ended up in, well, currently like month 7 of trying to figure out how to actually unfuck my credit score, because American Express has no actual easy way to go dispute something with Equifax, and Equifax has to go solve something in 30 days. So again, we have another broken system. Another one, regulatory capture. This is me printing out a piece of FinTrack, which is Canadian financial regulation. Well, they actually name specifically Equifax and TransUnion Canada, and then the next area say that you have to go identify an individual through a dual process. So what does that mean? We're all customers of this entire system, and that's kind of messed up. And like, here's another great one. September 2017, Equifax discloses the fact that they had a major data breach. Well, after that slap on the wrist, look at this. Their share price is right back up to where it was before that hit. That's the share price from this morning. This is the system that we live in, where we are third parties to this entire system that we are born into this. We never asked for it. And there's a significant amount of other issues with it. So I'm gonna try to race through this. How do we fix this really quickly? Well, the first one is like, let's stop doing this thing where we let some random third party be our source of truth. Sources of truth are highly important. I'm a software developer saying that, so I'm a little bit more dogmatic about this. But like, what happens if I put an invoice? Well, when I pay that invoice, I get a receipt. We have this system already. That's accounts receivable, accounts payable. Except that it does not happen at a consumer level. We don't look at the rent checks that we send or the receipts that we have as part of our credit report. Well, we can fix that really quickly. Let's just make it part of our credit report. Another one, let's score this one better. Well, the one on the left, this is how your credit score is calculated at an abstract level. And well, we can add a whole bunch of other things to it. Income to debt ratio, because income's not considered here. How often you actually make payments, and like real-time calculations, because the payments, the credit scores that you have are not calculated at real time. They're calculated in static moments. So if you have high utilization on one day, on the day that your thing happens to be calculated, well, you have a way lower credit score than if it was the next day and you paid off your entire credit card. That doesn't seem very equitable to people either. Another one, let's actually consolidate the data. Yes, I've put in hashes in there, but at the end of the day, it's like, if you walk up to your landlord and say, hey, I have an impeccable track record, and here I can prove it, I can verify that, why shouldn't that be the reflection of how you can actually pay back something? Instead, we sit in a world where some other random entity is doing it, where you can't really reverse a situation and a fraudulent or an error transaction really easily. Instead, you have to go through hoops and hoops and hoops. And when most of us are trying to get rent here in Toronto where you need it within like an hour, that kind of sucks. So I don't really have a whole lot of solutions to give on this one, but it's more about the fact that we should stop doing the same old things again and again. Stop giving away our data to third-party sources and start understanding how these things are scored, how they impact us, and how they impact our macroeconomy, and more importantly, how these things are going to impact us in the future when we stop being part of the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Hi, thank you so much. Recently, the whole rental thing has just been a nightmare. So I'm Canadian, moved to the US, came back to Canada. Weirdly, I came back as a US employee for a Canadian company. So the tax thing is a whole nother issue. But they wouldn't accept my Experian, which I've been enlisted with for years and years, like 15 years in the US. So Canada wouldn't accept that. So I was being paid in US dollars, US bank account. I switched it over here. But then, you know what? I got through it and it was fine. I got my place, but it was like a lot of hoops. And then I live beside Airbnb, and I'm like, wow, I just had to spend all of this time and effort to prove my, financial status to get this one-bedroom apartment. And yet these yahoos beside me are Airbnb-ing it and destroying these apartments. I'm like, you know what? It's really tainting like my experience, even though I'm Canadian, I'm from Toronto. But I don't know how to get around or how we'll get around the fact that you expect so much from someone to rent, but then right beside you is someone, renting their place out for a lot more money and they don't care about who's staying there.
I love this story because when I moved into my last place, before that I had to have like a month between places. It just took a month to get my new place. And so I was having some issues because like I'm an ex-founder. I put a little bit too much of my last company on my credit card. Still hurting on that a little bit. And so my realtor was like, Rohan, you're never going to get a place. You're going to have to put like 6 months up front. And like, no, that's not happening. And so I started looking elsewhere. And well, every single person I went to try to get rent from my, through my realtor, sorry, I didn't get those places because they were just looking at my credit score to disqualify me. And then again, I realized that, wait, I can do a month long with Airbnb that ended up being less money. And like, this is where I started getting really, really upset about this entire situation because it makes no sense to me. And one of the funniest parts is I actually started getting a little bit desperate at one point in time. And I went to Kijiji, and I don't know if anybody's looked at Kijiji lately, but you look at Kijiji and there's like every third ad is like, we can help you get an apartment if you don't have the credit score. And like, given that I was working on this problem in other ways, I was like, you know what, let me call this person up. And call this guy up, and he's like, just very, very great salesman, selling me right out of the gate. Obviously, I wasn't gonna buy his product at any point in time, but his thing was, there's so many different people in Toronto who have the salary to get an apartment, but they don't have the credit score. So I'm like, okay, so how do you fix this? Like, do you do like some sort of remedial credit score fixing? And like in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, I'm a fintech guy, I understand what's going on here. And he goes, no. And he was like very, very blunt about it. He's like, no, we just print them up a new credit score. I'm like, oh, that's cool. How much has that bitten you in the ass? He's like, never. And like that part was shocking to me. It's like, you've never been bitten in the ass for like printing out a fake credit score? Well, it's because nobody actually cares about the credit score, right? Like, I'm guessing Clearbank, you're doing a completely different thing right now in terms of understanding what the actual real metrics are. Because credit scores in 2019 don't make sense anymore. And like another piece that if I could talk much more efficiently, I would have said, well, we have machine learning, we have a whole new level of statistics, and we shouldn't be looking at 1950s scoring and 1950s actuarial sciences. We can do these things real time right now. And we have to push for a different system, because as much as all of us in the room might be like, oh, credit scores suck, there's a shit ton of people in this macro economy who are suffering from it because they cannot actually get houses. They cannot get rental places, they cannot get cars, and like it's stuff because they come to Canada and they don't have an actual credit history because for some reason Equifax has decided that they cannot move their thing across a border. Why do they do that? Money.
We're just going to do one more question, and then we're going to move on to the next segment.
Hey, great topic, very important topic for sure. I would love to hear your thoughts on Secure Key's Verified Me platform.
I can't speak about that. I actually cannot speak about that one just because there's other stuff we're doing with it. I'm going to go to a different subject slightly, but something similar. Like I think in the crypto world, the cryptocurrency world, the KYC aspects of that are a little bit more sane, mostly because there's a little bit more data coming out of that. I'm kind of ambivalent on secure key, but like the reasons, we'll talk about it a different day, or as Leah mentioned, over beer. I still think there's a lot of room in the market. I think the market can bear a much better identity system. I think the identity systems really, though, have to start outside of selling it to FIs or doing it in the most concrete way. I think we have to go back to like a consumer platform. And by consumer platform, I mean something that consumers actually adopt, as opposed to just one day being born and saying, oh, wait, I have to do that one day. So yeah, that's my KG answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.